Hello, good morning to our colleagues in Southeast and South Asia. Good evening to our colleagues in the mainland US, and good afternoon to people at the University of Hawaii and in Hawaii. My name is Miriam Stark, and it's my great honor to introduce the webinar this afternoon, which is part of our Loose Southeast Asia Transition Series. The title is Changing Labor Relations in Southeast Asia, and we focus here on how the growing economy in Southeast Asia has changed labor relations. We look at what kind of marginalization is happening, who is marginalized amid the growing economy across the region. The changing labor issues in Southeast Asia from the past to the present will be discussed, and our colleagues will predict what will happen in the future. To that end, we have some excellent speakers and a wonderful moderator, and I'm now going to turn the conversation over to Dr. Abdul Chang, who is an assistant professor in the Social Sciences and Liberal Arts Department at the Institute of Business Administration in Karachi, Pakistan. He completed his doctoral studies from the University of Texas at Austin in 2015, and we're very grateful that he's agreed to serve as moderator. Thank you very much for joining us. I hope you'll enjoy the conversation. Dr. Chang.
Thank you. So it's over to me. Thank you very much, everybody. Yes. Thank you very much, everybody, coming today. So I think this is going to be very interesting talk because Southeast Asia has been predicted, imagined, or represented as fastest growing economy in the world in last 30-40 years. And because of the tourism, infrastructure, buildings, roads, airports. So in these terms, this talk, changing labor relationship, is going to give us an insight from expert from these three countries, Malaysia, Thailand, and Indonesia, that how does the expert think about these changes and what direction they are taking. So I will introduce these speakers, and I think then we will start from our first speaker. So Dr. Only is Senior Fellow with the Malaysian Studies Program and Regional Economic Studies Program at Ishak Institute, Singapore. He was previously Senior Lecturer in Development Studies at the University of Malaya. He authored Affirmative Action in Malaysia and South Africa, Preference for Parity, and co-edited Defeat of Barrison, National Missign or Late Surge. He have written various perspectives in trade articles on Malaysian affirmative action, inequality, and education and labor. He led an unprecedented field experiment on hiring discrimination, published as Discrimination of High Degree, uh, Race and Graduate Hiring in Malaysia. But I think Dr. Lee is also expert on Southeast Asia other than Malaysia. That's my understanding. Hindun Anisah is women rights activist. Her support for women's rights includes the rights of female migrant workers, lead to her appointment to the Presidential Task Force for heading up Indonesian citizens facing death penalty around 2011-12. Hindun, since 2019, has been special staff member of Minister of Manpower of Indonesia, but recently I think she has changed her position. So Hindun is expert on labor relations and human rights in Indonesia. Our third and last speaker is Amporn. Amporn is associate professor at the University of Chiang Mai in Department of Social Sciences. She received her PhD from University of Texas Austin in 2018. She was Harvard French Institute Scholar 2022-2023. Amporn research interests are in two areas of media flows and mobility of people across national boundaries. One area focuses particularly on the movement of Shan migrants from Myanmar into Thailand. Her recent research involves reconstruction of masculinity among Chiang migrant men who engage in sexual in Chiang Mai, Thailand. I think with this brief introduction, I will ask Dr. Lee first to go on. So just to reiterate, three of the speakers, they have 10 minutes each maximum, or if they have interesting things, they can go ahead. And after each uh, done, next one can continue. And when three are done, then we can have the discussion session. Dr. Lee, over to you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Chang, and I want to thank the Center for Southeast Asian Studies, UH, for this kind invitation. It's good to join you, and I think also there's a connection from one Southeast Asia center to another across the ocean, but we have a commonality of common interest in the region, and I look forward to sharing a bit about Malaysia. I think, as Dr. Chang said, I do focus on Malaysia with a little bit of dabbling into Southeast Asia, but it's really complex. And I was actually I didn't advance as much as I would like to on a current project, but I'm happy to take some questions. I have looked at migration into Malaysia mostly in that context. Let me share some slides so that we can give you as well a little bit of information to digest, so that it's not just words. And I think I'm assuming that you're not entirely familiar with Malaysia, which is upper middle income country. It's not the biggest country in the region and may not really be on the radar very much. I will touch on Malaysia's labor policy, which has seen some formal progress, but there's also a lot of structural changes that persist, and just giving you the view from Malaysia. But first, to give you a snapshot of Malaysia, this is the location on the map, a country of 31 million citizens, 34 million residents. Estimated, we never know the actual amount, some of the undocumented. Gross national income, sort of a summary of the economy, its level of advancement. This is a crude measure, but still something that, it can be, I think, an indicator that is widely used and sort of the first signal of where Malaysia is. It's sort of the aspiration is to join high income, and it's nearly there. It's still on track and was set back by currency devaluation. But anyway, there it is. It's just one of the upper middle income, high at the upper margin of upper middle income to cross over into high income threshold. It's an economy that generally doesn't suffer high unemployment problem. Of course, with youth, it's a bit higher at about 10%, but quite a robust labor market with 3.3 to 3.5%. Currently, even with COVID, it only went up to about 5.3%. It's quite an educated labor force. This is a testament to the advances in education. So about 35% have a tertiary education. So I'm just going to skim over very briefly. I won't be able to get into in depth on everything, but I just wanted to present all of this, which does give you a sense of some of the magnitude of the progress Malaysia has made as far as institutionalizing changes, passing laws, and reforms in the field of labor legislation, in the field of social protection provisions. And we can go back, I think, to 2013 with a major change with minimum wage. So that is, I think everyone would understand, the legal minimum that can be paid, which applies to all except domestic workers in Malaysia. Social security for workplace injury. One of the changes that was made is this has been around for a long time, but in the recent years, it was extended to self-employed and to migrant workers as well. So that's the one to take note, that some of these arising from certain pressures domestically and internationally these provisions have been extended to migrant workers, including the employment insurance system as well. So that was newly introduced. but also soon after that extended to migrant workers. Legislation for minimum standards of housing for workers, that was also something that was a law that was passed, which is trying to regulate that better. Again, primarily related to the foreign migrant workers for whom dormitory accommodation is provided. Labor outsourcing was a major structural issue, a problem that, or the root of a lot of problems with migrant worker abuses and forced labor. And so it was something that was phased out, although in 2019 officially, although there's evidence that is still persisting sort of in more informal ways. So again, this theme of formal progress in terms of really enhancing the regulations and introducing laws is one thing, but in terms of implementation, what's happening on the ground, I think there's still a gap. Malaysia committed to this decent work program in 2019. It was an MOU between the government, between business and labor under the auspices of the ILO. So it is moving in that direction again of overall improvement in labor standards, in phasing in eliminating forced labor, right? And I think part of it as well because of some notoriety of Malaysia with regard to trafficking in human persons and forced labor. So there was an action plan again with ILO involvement on forced labor. 2021, so with the goal of eliminating forced labor by 2030. Employment Act amendments, some of these as well there is a connection with the US because as part of the Trans-Pacific Partnership and efforts to standardize across countries the labor regulations. So some of these were introduced, not necessarily directly with the US, but certainly it's part of coordination or meeting more international standards with regard to work hours, maternity leave, flexible work arrangements. There's also been a Trade Union Act amendment, although this is a bit in limbo right now, which is meant to enhance the strength of trade unions and allow trade unions that are based on industry and based on occupation to coexist. And most recently this year, progressive wage policy that is aiming to address wages above the minimum between that and the median wage, and it's undergoing a pilot run at the moment. We can come back to some of these later as if you have questions about them. So again, that you could see that there's been a lot of progress in terms of formalization of better laws and the scope of social protection for workers, including migrant workers. But some of the structural changes persist. And you can see here a snapshot of wages of employees, which you can see is at quite a low level and not much differentiated you could look on the right half there. The elementary agricultural workers, craft workers, service workers. I draw attention to some of those because whereas minimum wage would be covered would cover the very lowest paid, especially elementary workers, the others are don't have that. Are above the minimum wage, right? And their wage increases or their wage levels, right, would depend on bargaining power and various other mechanisms and institutions. So craft workers, service workers, those wages are low. And wage growth has also been low, right, for sort of what we can term the medium skilled jobs, again, like craft workers, clerical workers, and so on. So we can see here that there's been higher growth at the top end and bottom end pre-COVID. We're looking at the blue and the orange lines here for managers, and then at the other end for agricultural workers, elementary workers. This is sorted left to right from highest paid to lowest paid. So COVID-19 from 2020 onwards, we're looking at the gray lines here. Those that were worst hit, right, are more in the middle. Again, elementary workers were relatively a bit more shielded, but also you can see that some of the vulnerable categories include agriculture and here managers do stand out quite a bit, but I think that's driven a lot by self-employed. So even if an own account well, that's the category that's used, own account operator, where you just basically running a business on your own. Those suffered quite a bit with COVID. But again, the theme is there's a bit more protection at the bottom end, right? There's been higher growth at the top end. It's the middle where there's been sort of less robust gains in real wage, and they are more dependent on having worker representation. So here is another trend that is important to note. I think is an important feature of the Malaysian labor landscape, the unionization. Right. So just go through the lines a bit here. I think what the red line, right, is the one that I think is more readily understood, and we compare across countries overall rate, how many members in the union per the share of the labor force that is unionized, and that's gone on a steady decline over many decades, maybe stabilize a bit at about 6%. It is though much lower, the unionization for the private sector, because and that's where unions are actually bargaining, right? Now you can see here, look at the green line at the top, the number of members per union, so the size of unions has been growing for government, and those unions don't actually collectively bargain, but they just sort of raise issues, to the government that gets fed into to influence the terms, right, for the government employees, right, which is sort of set through parliament or through cabinet, but not through collective bargaining. Union members, private sector member unions have been shrinking in size, the bottommost line here. So overall, members per union also has seen a decline, the dotted line, the dashed line, but in the private sector where bargaining actually takes place actually has been declining. So but there's another trend that has really been studied, but I noticed it, and I think it's significant, that occupational unions have been increasing. So Malaysia, a lot of unions in Malaysia are constituted at the firm level. So just within a factory or within an organization, not at the industry or occupationally. But there's been an increase in the number of occupational unions, and I think that corresponds with changes in the labor market, with increasing employment that is more of on an occupational basis, right? Gig workers and so on, where they're not tied to a particular industry or employer, but they operate more in an occupational space. So that's something worth noting. As I noted just now, there is this legislative bill. It could facilitate union growth and bargaining power, but it's kind of in limbo at the moment because of some disagreements about whether workers can join concurrently two unions. That's the proposal, but there's been some pushback that would dilute the power of unions, which already is very weak. On migrant workers, which are varying, of course, in terms of the share of the workforce based on the estimate of the undocumented, but I think it would somewhere be between 10% and 25%. That as you see there, undocumented between 1 million and 3 million. There's been that spike in the 2000s in the number of these are the approved permits for foreign workers. And then you see up and down trends. And the graph here is really to show that, right, there's this vulnerability of workers when there's crises. You see that drastic decline, and many were repatriated back to the home countries in 2020. But also there's been these kind of moments where it can really increase when there's a mass registration. So that's on those formal, the registered, documented workers. Those triangles there are showing the estimated total number, which would include undocumented workers as well. Now, that's clearly an underestimate, but this is really going to show that, right, these are the dynamics in terms of trying to keep track of the data in the labor market. There was a huge labor supply industry, and there have been efforts to curb that because it is one of the major, probably the root factor for labor abuses, where there's labor outsourcing. So of migrant workers. And so, the workers show up in a workplace and they don't even know who they are or the person that they actually hired, that they are actually working for is not the operator of the workplace, like a factory. So there's much less accountability and a lot more scope for abuse. There have been some curbs on that, but it's really still a problem that the country is struggling with. A lot of corruption. And I think on a country by country basis, it also really varies because it also depends on the efficacy of the sending country, where you see Philippines advocates for their workers much better than a country like Bangladesh, which, there's a much poorer in advocating for the rights and welfare of the Bangladeshi workers. So I think I just want to leave you with these takeaways for the brief presentation that Malaysia has progressed substantially on the formalizing labor protection and the welfare institutions. Still some are early days of implementation, as you could see. It's only been the last 10, 15 years that some of these things were introduced and some only in the last 5 years. But with the persistent problems of low wages, weak worker representation, precariousness of migrant workers, the structural challenges that persist, Malaysia wants to transition to this high road, but it's still stuck, I think, in some ways, but it's struggling along the way, still having low road kind of practices, right, and entrenched systems that keep it on a low wage and low productivity and low standards. And I think part of it is that the workers' voice is still very weak, so that will need to be strengthened. And I think the actions on labor migration and forced labor, that's a systemic problem. That's something that really Malaysia will need to deliver on what it actually has set out for the next 5 to 10 years. I'll conclude with that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Lee. And I think now we are ready to have a conversation with Hindun Anisah. Hindun Anisah, over to you.
Yes, thank you. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, everybody. Dr. Chang, Dr. Lee, and Dr. Amporn, and also Mbak Ima. So here I would like to share my presentations, but I'm so sorry. I cannot share my PowerPoint because it is in Bahasa Indonesia. So this is about the current conditions of employment in Indonesia and recent changes. Talking about the economic growth in Indonesia now is increasing. Now in 2023 become 5.05. Before that, in 2020, it's the economic growth -2, and then in 2021 that increased 3.70 and now become 5.05. So it is a kind of good news in Indonesia. And about the labor conditions after COVID-19, the unemployment rate in Indonesia now is decreasing. Now is 5.86. So of course it's still bigger than in Malaysia. Yeah? I saw in Malaysia only the unemployment rate 3.3. Yeah? So this, but this decreasing because before that in 2020, unemployment rate reached 7%. So it's very, very high. Yeah. And about the workforce in Indonesia, the employment in Indonesia now majority, 55% of employment in Indonesia are elementary school graduated. So the majority is elementary school. They are graduated from elementary school, and only the very, very few percentage that are graduated from university. So this is the condition of the unemployment in employment in Indonesia. And according to the policies in Indonesia, we have a law number 13/2003 on labor and job creation, and also we have job creation law that we call it Omnibus Law number 11 2020. You know, these two policies have had mixed effects on the labor class. But yeah, even though these policies aim to create more flexible jobs, but for many workers, of course, this is kind of they are what is it? It's not happy. They are not happy with this law, because the workers think that the law are only for the employers, not to the employees. So this is because of that, our president, Pak Jokowi, revised the Omnibus Law, 2 years ago, and now we have the amendment for the Omnibus Law. And we have also the law for migrant workers. The law for migrant workers is number 18/2070 on the protection for the Indonesian migrant workers. Speaking about the Indonesian migrant workers, according to the data of the WHO, according to the data of World Bank, around 9 million Indonesian migrant workers who works in the overseas, and mostly they are working in Malaysia. Yeah, that's of course there are still problems like undocumented migrant workers. Also, this is we are facing that kind of problem. But every year we have we are improving through the new strategy, and also a new kind of how to implement the regulation. Because according to the regulations, there are the protection for the migrant workers. We have like a strategy from Indonesia until in the destination country, but still there are still problems. And our former minister, Ms. Ida Fauzia, who just elected to be parliament members and inaugurated 1st October, like 2 days ago, when she 2 years ago that she promoted 9 innovations, 9 innovation. We call it 9 innovations in employment development. So 9 innovation is to decrease the unemployment rate, and also to increase the participation of workforce in Indonesia. Yeah. So 9 innovations are the transformation of vocational training centers. So we in the Ministry of Labor, Ministry of Manpower, we have more than 500 vocational training centers, or we call it BPV, Balai Pelatihan Vokasi. In Indonesia, Balai Pelatihan Vokasi, or vocational training centers. So we have more than 500 vocational training centers that's spread all over Indonesia, and we transformed to be more modern, to be more like how to engage the millennials, yeah, how to engage the young people. So we transform the vocational training centers, and also we also add like the new professions, and also we also engage like digital transformation. And the second one is strengthening manpower link and match initiatives. So this is in Indonesia, we still have a problem, but link and match. I mean, that's students, they study, for example, they study accounting, but after that, they work as maybe they work in the restaurant, or they work in in the place that's not match with the knowledge that they have. So because of this kind of problem, so we try to how to strengthen the link and match, yeah, the link and match. So we to implement this second innovation, so we improve the system information of the labor market. So we improve the LMIS, yeah, labor market information systems, and and also we develop the LMIS, and we also we collaborate with the how to say the private sectors, yeah, the private sectors to engage in the LMIS. And the third innovation is expanding job opportunities. So in expanding job opportunities, we develop we call it the tenaga kerja mandiri, is a independent workforce around Indonesia. And so we built like 20 employment environment in Indonesia. And in that 20 environment, we engage the industry there. So after the students were after the workers, they were trained in our training centers, vocational training centers. So the industry will place them, will take them to work in their company. So this is how to expand the job opportunities. And the fourth one is enhancing placement and protection of Indonesian migrant workers that I mentioned above. We developed the regulations and also implementation, and also like just this morning, I have to verify the new regulations to the Indonesian migrant workers, is a kind of how to verify the job orders. So this is to make sure the protection for the Indonesian migrant workers. So in this placement and protection, of course, we prioritize to protect the migrant workers. And the fifth one is development of young talent. So here we call it a talent hub in our website, kemnaker.go.id. And also we developed many programs for the young people. Yeah. And the fifth is the sixth is the development of digital labor ecosystem. Yeah. So here we develop the ecosystem using the digital technology, and the seven innovations is the labor inspections reforms. So this is the issue of the labor inspection, also still the issue in Indonesia. So we have the weakness here because the number of the labor inspectors are very few, and so the problem is the lack of the number of the labor inspectors, especially in the companies. So here we encourage the companies to add the number of the labor inspectors. And the eighth is new visions of industrial relations. You know, in Indonesia,
maybe Pak Hindun, you can conclude, then we can come back.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. Only 1 minute. Yes. So in Indonesia, we have 12,346 trade unions. So it is a very, very big numbers, yeah. Trade unions in Indonesia, because it is mandatory to the companies to facilitate the workers to develop or to participate in trade unions. So this is the presentations from me. Maybe we have we can more discuss in the questions and answer. Thank you.
Thank you very much for giving us a vast perspective from the government and how we have a different institute we are implementing. I think I will now ask Dr. Amporn, and I think this is very interesting, her talk. These two talks were mostly about the state, how the state is trying to regulate or to operate labor policies. But in Dr. Amporn's case, we have the story of the migrants, how the migrants been treated by the Thai state. So Dr. Amporn.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me here. First of all, I need to say that I'm not an expert on the labor policy. I work with the migrant communities, so I will speak about this from a very ground level. When we discuss about labor policy in Thailand is both sending and receiving countries of migrant workers. So we need to discuss about this from two perspectives. First is from a perspective of Thai workers, and the second is from the perspective of foreign migrant workers. So for the Thai, there are laws and policy in place like Labor Protection Act and the Social Security Act, the Workmen's Force Protection Act. Like these laws actually aim to provide fair wage, safe working conditions, benefits, but I have to say that this is not my area of expertise. I cannot say much about that, but what I can say right now that there are two concerns for the Thai workers. One is a minimum wage that the current government, the leading party, promised that once they became the government, they will try to raise the minimum wage from 300 baht something, which is less than $10, into maybe above $10 a day. So, but it has been 1 year already that they still cannot do it. So the minimum wage of 300 baht per day, it's often barely cover the cost of living right now, because the question that Chang was asking about the economic growth in the region, economic growth in Thailand as well, and in the region as a whole, also make the rising costs of housing, of food, of transportation, and healthcare, and so stagnant wage have led all the even Thai workers themselves struggle with the financial security. But while raising the minimum wage seem to benefit the workers, but the government and the employers, the businesses, are reluctant for this, because it, of course, it will increase operational costs for them, the risk of layoff, they cannot remain competitiveness, right, due to the labor costs, high labor costs that they cannot cope with. So there has been an oppose from the business point of view. That's why Thai government cannot raise minimum wage so far, even though it has been 1 year already. So this is a concern from the Thai workers' perspective. The other concern that I think I will save it to talk about it later, maybe on the second round. It's about the emergence of the informal economic sectors, like application-based platforms like food delivery, ride sharing, or ride hailing, food delivery and Grab, and all kind of transportation or delivery. This is part of the growing economy of Thailand, but there's no policy on this, which there are lack of security issue. So I think I heard from Dr. Lee that Malaysia expand the social security operations to self-employed, but Thailand still lack of this kind of policy. So these are 2 points that I would like to talk about, the labor policy related with Thai workers. But let's talk about migrant workers. As you can imagine, Thailand's map that's surrounding with the neighboring countries like Myanmar, Laos, Cambodia. This is not like Singapore or Indonesia or Malaysia, where when you want to enter into the countries, you need to enter by planes, right? Or just exception in the case of Malaysia and Indonesia border, or Malaysia and Thailand border. So you need some kind of permits already before you enter into those countries in South Asia. But in Thailand, because of the natural borders, imagine we have 2,400 kilometers border with Myanmar. So these migrants enter into Thailand illegally first, but later on the Thai government gives some kind of exemption, allowing them to document as migrant workers. So the status of breaching immigration law still remain there, but then the Thai government gives some kind of exemption, allowing them to stay in Thailand upon the registration. So they're allowed to stay in Thailand for 1 year or 2 years, renewable, but they have to renew every time. And so this kind of policy, which based on the exemption of these migrants, even though we have the policy of MOU, but I'm sorry that I did not know that we could have PowerPoint, so I did not prepare for the PowerPoint. I understood that this is a round table discussion. So we have an MOU with those neighboring countries of Thailand to import migrants, like by the agreement between the two countries. But the majority of migrant workers in Thailand, they are illegal migrants first, but Thailand given exemption for them to remain in Thailand so long as they register, right? So the number of registration comparing with the MOU is like huge. So the number of documented migrants is about 2 million, which this majority are from Myanmar. The second of this is from Cambodia, and the third is from Laos. Whereas the MOU number that imported with an agreement between the employers from two sides, from employer and the worker, it's about I think it's about 40,000 of them. So you can see that the number is huge. So even though Thailand trying to regularize the status of migrant workers, there are limited rights and working conditions. So the lack of rights, first of all, they are not allowed to change employers within the year of registration. Second of all, there's a limit of mobility. So you cannot travel outside the province of registration. So if you want to travel outside the province of registration, you then need to apply for permission to travel outside the province. For example, if I'm registered in Chiang Mai, I cannot travel outside Chiang Mai. So this is a kind of limited mobility that's really an obstacle, and it's against human rights of migrant workers. So also about healthcare rights, even though Thailand is quite well developed in terms of universal healthcare, and migrants who are registered, they have to pay for healthcare insurance, but still the healthcare rights remains the area where migrants lack of these rights. So I think I don't know, should I stop there for now and maybe wait for the next round? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think this is very interesting and discussion. So we got three different perspectives, but I think maybe I can continue discussion with Amporn, because it seems very different perspective, and then I'll ask Dr. Lee to join in the discussion. So in this discussion, I think we got three different perspectives. In terms of Malaysia, it seems state is regularizing labor condition, it's improving, and things are still in the process. In terms of Indonesia, it seems there are like a lot of laws, as Hindun Anisah mentioned, and also the state is trying to regulate the law, but it seems that problem is with the monitoring of the law, or how the law should be implemented. And in terms of Thailand, I think what we see is that whereas in Malaysia, the migrant worker are facing, I think, a lot of problems, but in Thailand, it seems the Shan, or the migrants from Myanmar, Cambodia, and Laos at least have some kind of the legality in terms of having the resident permit, though with the restrictions and with the problems. So maybe I will start with Amporn. So how do you see the role of these migrants in Thai economy? I ask this question from the perspective that generally Thailand is depicted as a heaven for the tourists, having natural beach, all these sites, herbs, natural medicine, all these things. In another side, there is like the textile industry and all other products, food, dairy going to the west. So within these contexts, how do you see the life of these migrant workers in Thailand? From Amporn, and then I think I will go to Dr. Lee.
I go first, right?
Yes.
Okay, so the question is role of migrants for the Thai economy, right? So Of course, I can see that the role of migrants workers, sorry, my house is near the airport. So it's always airplanes passing by. Well, you can imagine that Thai workers don't want to do those kind of jobs anymore, right? And there's a prediction that by next year, Thailand will have a labor shortage of 5 million people. 5 million people, you can imagine that this is equivalent to the whole population of Laos, right? So we need to import the whole Lao population to Thailand to sustain the labor shortage. So migrant workers come to perform this kind of dirty, dangerous, demeanor job that Thai people don't want to do it anymore, right? And even though we're trying to have twin track policy like Malaysia and Singapore to attract the high skilled workers as well, but still we are not that successful like Malaysia or Singapore in terms of attracting high skilled workers. We don't trying to implement the twin track policy like Malaysia and Singapore that much. But in terms of the low skilled workers, of course, they feel in the sectors that we in need of cheap labor costs, and that remains Thailand remains competitiveness in the world economy because of these migrant workers. But I think when we talked about this, we might need to talk about this from two perspectives. One is the policy. Of course, the policy is in place, right? Policy of Alien Migration, Alien Labor Act, or all kind of this thing. But the policy, in a way, it's very cumbersome. For example, registration process, you need to find someone to register you. Of course, this is a good way to register with employers, but well, migrants often have to pay these employers, or employers sometimes confiscated their passport in order for them not to move to other employers, right? And sometimes the limited of movement is kind of against human rights of migrant workers. This and the cumbersome of the policy that it's not a one-stop service, and many ministries that involve in this kind of registration, in this kind of taking care of migrant workers. So ministry that involved is the Labor Ministry, Ministry of Internal Affairs, Ministry of Human Rights or something. I forgot. There's so many things. Migrant workers also cannot have. The employers are not forced to give them social security. So this is something. And even those who come with the MOU, if they want to return to the country, they need to pay for themselves to return to the country. And the policy take off the wage from them in order to send them back when they finish the contract. This is a kind of the cumbersome of the policy that not facilitate migrant workers in a smooth way, right? But the second perspective that I think we need to also bear in mind is that the Thailand's policy is implemented from the blending of economic point of view that Thailand wants to benefit neoliberal policy that want to benefit from these migrant workers. But at the same time, national security is also play a very important role in a Thai government psyche, right? So we don't want to give them rights of movement because then they might unionize, they might get together, they might create a crime, this and that. Right. So this is two perspectives that I think it's part of Thailand policy in terms of the cumbersome of the policy and also the policy that look at migrants from a national security perspective.
Thank you. I'm sorry, my house is also near the airport, so sometime you will hear the airplanes. Uh, so I think this is very interesting discussion, and I go now to Dr. Lee. So Dr. Lee, I think one of the interesting things which you mentioned is that the educated, like highly educated labor, the Malaysians or the quality of the education is higher, but the unemployment, you also mentioned the higher unemployment. So continuing the discussion, what Dr. Amporn is also saying that it seems that there is a growth in Southeast Asia and Malaysia, Singapore, but beneath that is the huge number of these workers, either they are migrant or the low paid, and in these countries, the success of economy is actually paved on these migrant labor. So what do you say about that from the Malaysian perspective with higher education, but like lower employment rate and depending on the migrant labor heavily?
Right. Okay. So firstly, I think what I said, we could see from the data. I mean, it's considered to be by comparative standards, 3% is a full employment kind of level. There is, still obviously quite a higher unemployment when people are shifting jobs, and that's reflected in the youth unemployment, which is the 15 to 24 age bracket, which is higher, around 10 to 12%. I mean, to me, those are not really alarming figures. I was just pointing out that, just as a matter of fact, that the youth unemployment is higher, but it's still, and the differential is a concern. But I think the bigger concern is along the lines of what Hindun had said about underemployment. That they have the formal qualifications, the educational certificates, diplomas, and degrees, but working in jobs that don't require that. I mean, at face value, yes, that's a problem. Not necessarily in all cases. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're very in very poorly paid jobs, but certainly that's the issue of mismatch. And I think the quality of the education is one thing, where there's also the qualifications, what they are learning, but also despite learning it, they don't really even have the skills and not as much of resourcefulness as I think sometimes even migrant workers. That I know it's a typical situation since time immemorial when people are migrant. They really have to stand on their own their own effort, right? They're far from home. In some ways, they're more exploitable, but in other ways, they're also more resourceful, right? And they're willing to put in a lot more of the work. And so they're also even, in certain jobs, like say in construction, where some of the learning can happen on the job. They're more willing to do that, or they're more able to acquire the skills than also to even undertake quite, high-skilled jobs, not necessarily through the formal training. Sorry, I'm going to shift around with quite a set of questions here, but sort of, I think, responding more broadly to the issue of migrant, and I'll try to tie in with what our fellow panelists have said with Dr. Amporn. With migrant workers, I mean, Malaysia, they are a backbone of the economy, right? Is in any country, right, where there are differentials, migrant workers from a lower income going, seeking opportunities, taking jobs that country, the people have kind of graduated from, or they are less willing to do, right? The more routine work, more physically demanding work for Malaysians, particularly, oil palm estates, right? In agriculture, in construction, in factories, there was such a desperate cry for foreign workers to return to get the permits approved after COVID, when many of them went back, and that's really a reflection of how dependent Malaysian economy is. For this process, right, it's undertaken of the labor standards, and Malaysia has had to respond. I mean, it's got it so notorious for abuses in the past that you had to, and being on the radar of countries like the US, the ILO, saying that you really, this is not good. This race to the bottom mode of taking the low road and riding on low standards and low wages is just plainly unsustainable, and really does not even make economic and business sense anymore. So that has been partly the external pressures, and internally as well from the advocacy within Malaysia to address some of the issues, and some of them though are still persisting. I think with the regulation that prohibits them foreign workers from changing employer. So their work permit is tied to the employer. They're only allowed to if the business goes bankrupt, but not if it's an abusive situation. So there are still some remaining areas that Malaysia will need to address, and I think it's also a very entrenched industry that has such vested interest, right, in supplying as much foreign labor as possible. And so this is where even when there are formal changes, when you have a system, right, that is wanting to retain the profits that it gets from charging high fees, right, from having its. So this is the Malaysia case, the receiving country and the sending country, right? They are in cahoots. You have these players that want to have their own labor supply agencies in Nepal, in Bangladesh, in Indonesia, and they're going to be very profit and they make huge profits from it. And so they lobby, and on the Malaysia side as well, right? They have partners who are also part of this system, right? That is a major hindrance, I think, to the progress that has been more formalized that Malaysia is trying to do.
Yeah, thank you very much. Before Dr. Lee, I move to Anisah, Hindun. I want to ask you one more question about eliminating enforced labor. So can you explain like what exactly this enforced labor was and how it is eliminated?
Eliminating what? Eliminating.
This is from Dr. Lee. Before I come
Yes.
to so Dr. Lee.
Thank you. Yeah, forced labor by definition of the ILO.
Oh, forced labor. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Actually, I think my panelists would know better. I know that there's 7 criteria, right? It's just blank from my mind now. I mean, including things like excessive overtime, but there is a particular set of criteria for evaluating that. And Malaysia, has been evaluated through rigorously in ways that show forced labor has persisted. And I think it provides a clearer framework because it's also then monitored, right, and will be aligned with ILO standards, where it has these, I believe it's 11 actually criteria. And I say related to conditions, related to unpaid wages, related to retention of passport. So those are some of the criteria for defining what is forced labor. And so yeah, Malaysia has come up with this plan, which can be also quite. You can clearly mark out what should be the objectives and the steps taken so that you can address point by point these elements of forced labor. I think anyone can look it up. That will be available, the definitions and what are the components that define forced labor.
Yeah, I think I come to you later with a particular question. I will go to Hindun, Anisah. Before, I think we can take questions from the online chat. So it was very interesting. Your discussion was very interesting, especially about the government, like how Indonesian government has laws, lot of laws, or too much laws for the labor. But I think my question, I have 2 questions. One question will be like the way you mentioned that the education and employment has a difference. So, and another question is about the labor monitors, like how to mention labor inspectors are very low. So my question is that do you think the laws the government is introducing is easily to implement and grow the economy or the job market in Indonesia, or is it in a way restricting the growth or the labor relations?
Yes, thank you. So, speaking about the mismatch between education and the employment, so we develop the regulations. We we produce the regulations. Also, we also collaborate among the ministry. For example, the collaboration between Ministry of Education and Ministry of Labor, of Manpower. We call it Ministry of Manpower in Indonesia. So between the MOU, Memorandum of Understanding between two ministry. So in order to not a mismatch between education and when they go to the go to the work environment. And about the labor inspectors, it's not the issue of the regulations, but the issue of the implementations, but not because the regulation is quite good, is like we call it excellent, and but the willingness or the we call it the goodwill from the companies to engage the the labor inspectors in Indonesia is a quite make the companies like scared, yeah. So like it's like a police or something like that. So that's why we encourage the people to be labor inspectors, and also according to the maybe the income or the wage for the labor inspectors, we have to increase that, because also now the wage, the wage that they receive as a labor inspectors is, we call it, is not adequate, because like one labor inspector, they have one labor inspector, she or he has to be responsible for 20,000 workers. So it's impossible, right? One labor inspector, 20,000 workers. Now the current condition. So that's why we encourage people to be labor inspectors, and the regulations is not restrict or it's easy to be implemented as long as the government, because to recruit the labor inspectors is not only the duty of the national government, but also the local government. So we encourage the local governments to recruit the labor inspectors also, and also to like propose the labor inspectors to the national government. So this is our homework now, and another homework, because the labor inspectors has to be government employers. So it is not allowed to be private, but from the government employers. So this is also the issue of the government employers also, because the number of the government employers, maybe we have to give more opportunities and give more the opportunities to government employers to be labor inspectors. That's the problem.
Yeah, thank you. I think we have 20 minutes left, and we have also questions in the boxes. But before, I think I will just ask last question, and then I think we will go and read the questions in chat boxes. So I think my question from Dr. Lee, and partly and briefly, I think if you can respond briefly, is that for example, undocumented migrant laborers from Indonesia, especially from Timor Island, they are in huge number in Malaysia, especially the women on the plantation, palm plantation. In a lot of cases, there is a huge cry about not having the documents. Because of that, they don't have any protection, neither the legal protection from the state or neither the healthcare. Uh, so, can you say something about that? Like, is there is something Malaysian government working on to regulate that? I'm asking particularly the way Amporn has said that even from the border in Thailand, the undocumented labor they come illegally, but they are given the work permit or they are regularized. Is there something like that for the Indonesian migrant workers in Malaysia?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, undocumented workers, is a perennial issue. I do think that there have been some, legitimate and effective measures taken because again, it's something that Malaysia has tried to redress. Now we need to look at Malaysia, and if you look back, well, the map. Let me just picture it. There's Peninsular Malaysia, and then there's Sabah Sarawak on Borneo. And so Peninsular Malaysia is all surrounded by sea except for a land border with Thailand. And then you have to fly in or you have to go by sea. It's a lot more challenging. You have the Sabah and Sarawak side where a lot more I think is happening. Certainly because it borders Kalimantan with Indonesia. Either a short river sort of sea crossing or by land as well. And so it's a more prevalent, especially in Sabah and Sarawak for plantations because they're also quite remote and harder to monitor. But I have friends who do research on this quite a bit, and it's a bit more nuanced than that, than just saying that, oh, you're undocumented and therefore your life is miserable and you're being exploited, right? Because they actually can cross over back and forth quite undetected, and it happens, and it can be seasonal kind of work. And so from the research, I mean, yeah, they are in a vulnerable situation. They're aware of it. It's something that not necessarily again is about just the worst kind of exploitation that is imaginable. So I mean, I think some of that also happens where where you have porous borders, you can have undocumented crossing back and forth, and really just according to their circumstances and whatever choices that they make. I think some of the worst ones, though, maybe we could say relatively worse, are when people actually come in documented, but and then they enter into the underground economy, either because they're brought in by under false pretenses under the guise of having a job in these promises, but then they get then they get passed around into other jobs, and by definition, then they become illegal because they have to change. They're not under their employer. And I think that can happen, and I think that does happen. It's a bit hard to gauge to what extent. Or some who come in and they're in busy situation, but they cannot leave. They don't have their passport, or they would become illegal because they have left an employer, and then they are they can be in the more again vulnerable positions and in all kinds of jobs, maybe even in the urban areas. So there are many sides to this issue of undocumented. I think it's definitely an issue and not a desirable situation. But again, yeah, it's sometimes from the workers' perspective, something that is just quite sensible and just their way of making a livelihood to cross the border and let's say work in a plantation in Sabah and Sarawak.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think we have a lot to talk, but there are also 10 questions. Maybe we will go to the first question, and you can also see this is from Dr. Lee, I think. Maybe we can, I can just read the particular question. It's long, but I think this is.
Is that from Iriana?
Yeah, Iriana.
I have read it, so maybe I can just address it as the best I can.
Yes, please. Yes.
Thank you for bringing that up. Yeah, I know she mentioned about the interest is about reintegration. I mean, I think that's mainly from your perspective and others who are in the sending countries, the situations for reintegration. But of course, I think the experience of a migrant worker as a migrant worker in places like Malaysia will definitely have ramifications on their reintegration. You have a good experience, well protected as a migrant worker. I think the reintegration is going to also, that translates into a better, smoother reintegration because you're not carrying scars of a bad experience. So I just that's just the point about the reintegration. I had mentioned Philippines and Bangladesh. I could also bring up Indonesia in the sense that the countries, the strength and the efficacy of how they advocate for their migrant workers certainly has an impact. Firstly, to say Malaysia is very bilateral, unfortunately, and ASEAN is quite poor as far as the mass of workers, right? These lower skilled workers, so quote unquote, whereas there's been attention to the more professional workers and having more mobility. But it's been much more hands-off, just sort of declaring principles for how to protect migrant workers that we are mostly talking about, who are, secondary school, primary school, working in the 3D kind of jobs. So the bilateral approach then depends a lot on how it goes between the two countries. And we can see that countries like Indonesia and Nepal, they've actually embargoed their workers and say that, look, if you're going to, for us to resend workers, you need Malaysia. Ironically, the more advanced country needs to improve on its standards for Nepali workers, for Philippine workers, Indonesian workers, domestic workers in particular. Bangladesh, I brought up that case, and I think it's really a stark one where you could see that it's not advocating so much for that, and you see there's sort of shady figures and all kinds of this labor supply industry that I was talking about, very much entrenched and basically trying to make money and trying to lobby for more workers. So this is what's in play bilaterally, because there's not a standardized stance Malaysia takes, but it's more ad hoc one-on-one MOUs with different countries.
Thank you. I think there is another question from Jenny Park. This is directed towards Dr. Amporn. Dr. Amporn, can I read for you the question, or can you see in the chat box? So, you are muted. You are muted, Dr. Amporn.
Okay. I think I read the questions, and maybe I just address this question
Sure.
directly. So, regarding the recent crackdown on the Burmese migrant workers, I think we need to look at this from 2 points of view. First is that recently there are increasingly coming more and more of Burmese people who seek refuge from the political instability in Myanmar, and also from the forced conscription in Myanmar, right? So that kind of the huge number of Burmese refugees who came across the border because of this forced conscription and the political instability, they are neither refugees or migrant workers. So they just hang without knowing what to do with themselves. Some of them who have resources, they might enroll in university, but then they need all kind of documents. Some of them who are like have a social capital or cultural capital, they are middle class people. But Thailand don't have any policy regarding these people. We cannot put them as refugees because Thailand did not sign UN Refugee Convention. So we cannot take them as migrant workers because, well, some of them are willing to be migrant workers. But these people, you have to remember that they are middle class. They have been working in the ministries in Myanmar. They participated in civil disobedience movement. That's why they moved to Thailand due to the persecution they face. So this is something that I'm a bit concerned that Thailand did not have policy towards this neither refugee nor migrant workers. But I think Thailand could embrace this like from economic point of view. They are middle class people. They're high quality people. They have been working in the ministries. They attend universities before, but they need to escape due to the forced conscription. The recent crackdown that I think happened due to the nationalist sentiment in Thailand, the fear of migrant workers coming to take away the job from the local people, and that happened that migrant children sing the national anthem in school like this, that create all kind of nationalist sentiment, which I think it's a job of the government to bring in a better understanding to the migrant workers that they in fact contribute to the Thai economy more and more. I hope to answer these two questions. Yeah.
Yeah, I think there are two more questions for Dr. Amporn, and I think there's a one question for Dr. Lee, but maybe we can go to Dr. Lee. You have another question by Ariana. It's at the very end. Maybe you can respond briefly, and then we can go to the other questions. Very end. Can you read, or can I read for you?
Why don't you go ahead and read it? Yeah, I'll read it.
Yeah, you mentioned that skilled labor often feels undervalued upon returning home. How can sending countries better recognize and utilize the skills and knowledge of returning migrants? What specific initiative can sending countries implement to integrate the skills of returned migrants into their economic development strategies? How can these efforts contribute overall economic growth of the country? This is from Dr. Lee for you.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I have to admit I haven't given this much thought at all. But I would say, it's at the different stages. There's probably more that can be done. So to firstly establish the connection, that the database, and for the sending country to know the workers, and to prepare them as well before they go. Knowledge about skills, about their rights as well, and maybe any kind of introduction to the country, and then to also keep monitoring the progress of their migrant workers. I mean, the Malaysia experience does show that the advocacy of the sending country, the embassies that are more vocal and more effective, they tend to get a better deal, and there's more accountability towards their workers. And I think to knowledge of who's coming back and what skills that they bring to retain that kind of database. That I think stands to put those workers in a better position to contribute when they return. So I think that's the most I would say. I want to add one more thing. I mean, about forced labor. I know I was struggling to think about the terms, but I think an important one, because I was also talking a lot about this industry, about sending. I mean, excessive fees, right, and debt. That is one of the main determinants and one of the most biggest leverage that abusive employers have on migrant workers, because they have debt to repay. They have expended so much in fees as well. And that's one of the hardest ones to eradicate as well, but it's an important one.
Dr. Amporn, there are two more questions for you. I think maybe if you can read both, or I can read for you, and then you can just respond together. I can read one question. It's again from Jenny Park. One more question to Dr. Amporn. Could you elaborate more the Thai government position to regard migrant workers as a national security issue? And the second question is, what is your thought on the future of Thailand's labor supply, while sending countries like Cambodia has been also working towards foreign investment, social protection, etc. to return workers too? You can briefly answer both questions together. You are muted, Dr.
Okay. Thank you for the questions. On the national security issues, I think I have said a little bit earlier that the limited of movement of migrant workers is also based on national security idea. And also when you talked about Thailand, I think you need to picture the map of Thailand, which is different case from Singapore, Malaysia, and Indonesia, because Thailand is surrounded by neighboring countries, like its border with Myanmar, of course, and Cambodia and Laos, right? So on the national security idea is based on the border control idea. So when you think about the border with Myanmar and Laos, for example, right now the hot topic is the scamming compounds, scamming industries that's surrounding Thailand-Myanmar border and also in Thailand and Laos border. So this kind of national security of like criminal gangs operating along the borders, Thai people also have been lured to work or trafficked to work there, right? So from the national perspective, national security perspective, like if people are trafficked to work in Thailand, they can be rescued from the human trafficking point of view, but then because they breach immigration law, they enter Thailand illegally. So they detained in the detention center and they deported back. This is kind of national security point of view that I'm talking about. The second question is about when now Cambodia is raising economy and trying to attract migrant workers more and more. Trying to attract foreign investment more and more. I think Thailand, we also have problems with this, right? Due to the strong of Thai currency, due to the weak of competitiveness in the cheap labor. Then I think Thailand, we have to rely more and more on Burmese migrant workers. But unfortunately, this kind of nationalist sentiment is still so strong among Thailand. Among Thailand and Cambodia, nationalist sentiment happened once or twice in the past, right? I think this is an emerging issues that we need to find a way to tackle. The government should not let it on the part of NGO workers alone to tackle this problem.
I think we have 2 more minutes left. So Dr. Terry, can we take one question, or should I? Can I just like?
I'm sorry, Dr. Abdul, what did you say again?
We have 2 more minutes left, I think. Can I keep asking questions, or?
Yeah, I think we can. We could probably go over just a little bit and nobody will mind.
Okay. Thank you. So Hindun, Anisah, I think maybe we will come to you. It's very interesting discussion about. I think the Thai context is very different. I didn't knew such details. I knew much about Malaysia or Indonesia. So, what do you think in terms of what we know about Thailand or Malaysia in terms of the migrants coming from other countries in the Indonesia? Are there any migrants from other countries in Indonesia? Are they allowed to have the work permits? Can you respond this briefly?
Yes, thank you, Dr. Chang. Also, we have migrant workers, migrant workers in Indonesia, but we have regulations.
You are muted, Hindu.
Sorry. Yes, we have also regulations according to the we call it not migrant workers but foreign workers. Foreign workers, because we restrict the foreign workers. We can accept the foreign workers if the foreign workers are the professionals. So according to the regulations, we are not allowed to receive like the lower workers, low-level workers. So we only receive the professionals workers, but the foreign workers also we give like the limitation of time, because for example, for the companies who take the foreign workers, so the foreign workers have to transfer knowledge to the Indonesian workers. So after that, so the foreign workers back to their country. So we have a very thank you.
Yes. It seems in Indonesia has more this regime of skilled workers who are needed for the. I think there is a last question, and after that, I think we will say thank you. And this can Dr. Amporn and Dr. Lee, anybody can answer. And this is a very interesting question and missing question. It's from Rooney. And one more question: how about migrant check between sending and receiving countries to protect human trafficking and undocumented labor problems? I think the major question is how to deal with this human trafficking problem while is they are sent as a labor uh, from Southeast Asia or within Southeast Asia. Maybe briefly, both of you, if you can answer or one of them, then we can go to the conclusion.
Dr. Lee? Okay, all right. So actually, Thailand is number 8 or 10 of the worst human trafficking in the world, right? So I don't know if we can say much about the policy regarding this. Thailand was ranked third tier 3 before in the human trafficking report by the U.S. Foreign Affairs Ministry. So we have trafficking in case of fishery, in case of sex trafficking, in case of now scamming industries along Thailand-Myanmar border, Thailand-Laos border, Thailand-Cambodia even. This is part of labor policy that Thailand, because of the ban on seafood industry that we faced from Europe, from the US before. That's why the government trying to tackle human trafficking issues. But I think due to the new technology and then with the AI, with the online, so this kind of thing, it's really difficult to tackle in terms of child pornography, in terms of scamming compounds. This is really, really difficult. And from the labor perspective, this is people, if they lure into the scamming industry or if they lure into sex trafficking, we don't have the policy to protect them. So this is a kind of difficult angle to tackle. I don't know. It's in terms of prevention or persecution. Thailand is trying to do it in terms of persecution, to persecute even the death penalty to the traffickers. But still, there are many internal problems like corruption, of course, right? So that's make us so difficult to tackle this.
Dr. Lee, along with that question, I think there is one question I missed and somebody reminded from the Shamil Ziauddin. And if you can also respond to both questions and then we can conclude.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, okay. I think it's fundamentally about enforcement and the will to do it. I mean, Malaysia, had that has sort of hovered. So if we take the U.S. Department of State's trafficking in persons report, and it has this ranking of tiers, and Malaysia's like 2 or never quite the worst 3 or watch list, and it has improved. I think some of that is, due to when actually the action is taken of actually showing proven cases and prosecutions. But it's ongoing, issue, and we're still, I think, a lot to do because the immigration department, is also one of the, most has the worst, one of the worst reputations, for corruption. So yeah, it's quite a very deep-seated problem, and a lot of, as I keep saying, a lot of vested interests as well. To Shamil's question, I think Malaysia is always a little bit trailing Singapore. I mean, Singapore, kind of is the advanced country in the region, right? And the standard bearer in many ways, and as well as in social protection, right, for self-employed, for gig workers, and so on. And Malaysia, speaking on Malaysia, which is the only one I could really say on this, there have been extensions of various things like social protection for workplace injury to gig workers, especially to the transport, to Grab in particular. But it was a voluntary basis, but Grab and maybe others as well, other platforms said they will do it, especially that because they are exposed to such dangers in the job that they do. But it's not compulsory. The question is whether to make it compulsory, and I think eventually it has to be, right? But it's a difficult one to enforce. But I think eventually it would have to be. I mean, some of the further ones, like the old retirement savings, is one that is a bit harder to enforce because it's a bit more costly for the employers, right? And you know, and whereas some of the others, it's sort of 1% of payroll and so on. But I mean, I think eventually to make it more to make the universal coverage, I think, you know, the only way really would be to make things mandatory.
Thank you very much, everybody. I think we had very interesting discussion on the changing labor relations in Southeast Asia, and we can see the case of Malaysia or Singapore or Indonesia and Thailand is very different. And one of the interesting things I think I have learned today is also that Malaysia has a different, Thailand has a different border regime. The way the neighbors are treated in comparison to Indonesia or Malaysia, and because of that, maybe because of the language, history, or particular kind of the relationship in the past. So this is very interesting that how these factors impact in deciding the labor condition about the migrants or citizens in the country. And I think with this, I will ask, maybe I will give back to the Terry, and we took some more time. Sorry for that, but I think people might have enjoyed it. Thank you, Terry.
Thank you so much, Dr. Abdul and Dr. Hwok and Anisah and also Amporn for being here today. Miriam said to please convey her thanks. Also, she had another meeting she had to go to. So please check in our chat. There's information on our upcoming events and webinars. We have 2 more loose webinars this semester that we hope you will join us. And there's also a survey that we'd really appreciate your input on taking. Again, thank you to the speakers for taking your time. I know your time of day was early morning, and we really appreciate you getting up and holding this webinar on our behalf. So everyone, thank you. Be safe, and hopefully your weekend comes soon. Aloha.
Aloha.
Aloha.